I want to spend a little bit of time now to give you a little bit of an overview of exactly what our program looks like. So LeadBoston is proud to say that we are building the city's largest network of inclusive, change-oriented leaders. As part of LeadBoston, participants explore and learn how to address barriers to inclusion in their workplaces and their communities during about a year, 11 months to be exact, of experiential activities, facilitated dialogue, expert speakers, and peer learning. So if selected, you would join this cohort, which would be a class of about 40 to 50 cross-sector leaders, where almost definitely every sector from nonprofit, government, and for-profit are represented, and a vast variety of different industries, from legal to education to pretty much you name it, and we've probably had it represented in the class. And we also have a class that is intentionally diverse in terms of life experiences, race, gender, age, and positionality in their different organizations. So lots and lots of different perspectives coming into one place, which is one of the pieces of magic of LeadBoston, because you won't find too many spaces where all of these different leaders are coming together, bringing their experiences, and having these open discussions about these really important topics. So each month we come together and we select one of the topics that we've mentioned, so housing, education, and I'll share a list in a little bit. And we try to immerse ourselves into the daily workings of the city and its neighborhoods and institutions that are related to that systemic challenge each month. You'll have the opportunity in LeadBoston to engage with our content both at in-person learning sites across the city, all different locations every time, as well as at your home office or remote workspace, because the program will have some hybrid components that you can do asynchronously on your own. And the program is also set up so that if there were any further CDC or COVID restrictions, we would be able to transition seamlessly to a virtual setup. So we are well equipped for both in-person and virtual programming. Each month, we also have facilitated dialogue and expert speakers. The guest speakers that we have are experts in their fields. They include academics, C-suite leaders, community organizers, direct service providers, representatives from the city. So we've had the mayor, we've had DA Rachel Rollins, we've had police officers, we've had CEOs of different organizations, we've had the executive director of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, we've had the director of the Boston Indicators, we've had radio personalities from WBUR, and a vast variety more. So it's also a great place to come where you'll have the opportunity to interact with and connect with these speakers who typically share their contact information with us afterwards, so you can further the conversation and have some access to folks that you might not otherwise be able to access and have conversations with about some of these really important topics. And during the day, you and your classmates would participate in some open and honest dialogue, both with one another as well as with those key leaders, those expert speakers who are in the room. And my personal favorite part of the program is that throughout the year, each month, you'll be thinking about how these different inequities might be showing up in your own organization. And you'll start to identify and analyze an inclusion-related challenge in your workplace, and then devise a plan with our support to address it. And that's what we call your leadership commitment. And the leadership commitment is a project, an action plan that you'll take on after you graduate from the program, and we'll follow up with you over the course of a year or so in order to best support you with furthering equity and inclusion in your workplace. Another amazing part of the program is that upon graduation, you will join a network of leaders that's over 1,000 strong, where those people, and you'll hear more about our alumni networks shortly, but those people will serve as allies and partners throughout your career. So that's a really broad overview of the program. But here are a few of our components. So each month we have most or all of these. So the first is pre-work and our online inclusive communication modules. So each month, as we're diving into a specific topic and a specific system of inequity, for example, education or housing, we'll provide pre-work that might include readings, podcasts, videos, or other types of learning in order for you to build your background knowledge on that topic. So you can come into the day armed with some knowledge and ready to ask questions and discuss. Our online communication modules are modules that we've developed that are really the value add skill building component of our program. And this part of the program is done asynchronously on your own, self-paced throughout the month. And you can use this as an opportunity to develop some real skills specifically around how to communicate about DEI related topics and language in the workplace setting. I also mentioned already that monthly we have our topical program days, and that's when we bring in the expert speakers and we have the conversations with one another. The leadership development happens throughout the year, but the execution happens after graduation. And then we also throughout the year have office hours and thought partnership where the LeadBoston team and YW staff is really available to support you in thinking through the action plan and thinking through challenges you might be facing at work or things that you might be interested in or passions that might have arose throughout listening to the different program days. And finally, we have networking opportunities for you to connect with your classmates and build really, really strong relationships and friendships. We have the majority of our alumni stay in touch with at least one person, typically more from their class year. They get together, they talk, they're able to network in a way that's helpful to career and also in a personal sense as well. And here are some of the topics that we cover throughout the year. So class and poverty, healthcare, immigration, education, housing and transportation, arrest and prosecution, and incarceration and reentry. These last two are both part of our series on the criminal justice system. And we're typically talking about specifically the city of Boston or greater Boston. So our program also has a really unique focus on not just covering these topics really broadly, but really bringing in the specific histories and the specific current events that are happening here in our city.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you're on this info session. This program is so important. I'll explain where I am in just a moment because it's part of my LeadBoston story, but I loved my LeadBoston experience. And it feels weird to say that in the past tense, being a graduate now, because I still feel like I love my LeadBoston experience actively. Even now on the alumni community, we're actually having a meetup next Wednesday, class of 2020. So it is still very much present for me, even though now I'm on the alum side and now we're talking about the 2022 program. I'm Omari Aarons. When I started the LeadBoston program, I was Director of Employee Enablement at Liberty Mutual Insurance. And right now, I am at Boston Medical Center. So if you hear some noise in the background, I'm sitting a little bit outside the cafeteria, working as a hospital chaplain for the summer. I'm in seminary now at Boston University School of Theology. And so kind of an unplanned life change in the middle of my LeadBoston experience was occurring. And it was beautiful to do that in the midst of really being surrounded by, I think, 40 some odd professionals really from all walks of the city. What initially attracted me to LeadBoston, I had my own lens as a person of color, as a Black man, as a millennial, as a member of the LGBTQ community. I had my own lens and was very much aware of issues that met my intersection. And I was doing some work serving as the chair of our Black Employee Resource Group at Liberty Mutual, where more and more I was being asked to speak and I was on these panels. And really ask more questions about the broader intersection of all the different dimensions of diversity, some of which I carried and some of which I didn't. And so it was revealing to me that as much as I knew and I appreciated my own experience and being able to talk to that, that there was still much more that I didn't know about. And so I always refer to LeadBoston as like the best diversity, equity, inclusion, justice homework program that I could have ever undertaken. And I say that attending a Research One institution in an advanced master's degree program right now, that my experience with LeadBoston is at minimum on par, perhaps even better than what I'm learning over in my classes at BU, though no papers. So I very much appreciated that as well. So I would say, you know, I've been in Boston now for 5 years and have been a human resources professional in corporate America for most of my career. And this was my second foray when I came to Boston in the financial services sector. And what was really cool for me was the mix of people in the program, really from every sector of the city. So when you see that written into the description of what the intentionality of who's in the room, and so for some of these issues that we think about, that we know about, that we've heard on TV, you know, literally in the room, you have police, you have lawyers, you have doctors and other medical professionals, you have social workers, you have corporate America across varying perspectives. You've got higher education, you've got K-12 education, right? And so it really helps you to think through the life cycle of the issues and how it impacts. I think too often in our society, we're unable to hold that multiple things can be true at the same time. And LeadBoston is in and of itself an exercise in seeing how one issue can be so complex. And not that any one community has a lock or a solid position on it, but people representing those communities were able to talk about the debates that were happening and how that was impacting and where they stood, but where others stood as well. And so you really had a very comprehensive experience. The best day for me was I-Day, which focused on immigration. And as much as I saw myself as an inclusive leader and as an ally, it was a reminder for me that communities that didn't touch my own experience in my own social location, how invisible some of those experiences were for me. And even with all the intersection and dimensions that I carried, I walked into that day and I thought I knew, and I had some sense of like what was happening, but I didn't know. And that day really was an eye-opening day for me. It was one of the earlier days in our session. And so I was like, okay, now I know. I'm really glad. I'm glad to be here because I am learning just as much as I am contributing to the conversations.
As Rachel mentioned, I am currently the program director at the Harvard Kennedy School. That was actually a job change that I had this year. And I participated in LeadBoston last year, which was a very, very interesting time to participate in the program. But a few things I wanted to share. I joined LeadBoston or applied to LeadBoston because I kept hearing about it through my networks. I would go to meetings where people would say, oh, I'm working on my LeadBoston commitment, or, oh, I know this person from LeadBoston. And so I looked into it. I asked the 4 alums that I knew personally to share their experiences with me, and they all highly recommended it. I think 2 of the 4 said it was the best thing that they ever did in their career. And so it was really helpful to have that information. So I think many of you probably know someone that's been through the program. So I definitely encourage you to reach out one-on-one and have those conversations. What I found that it was particularly helpful for was expanding my network. So I feel like as someone that was coming from the nonprofit world and working with the criminal legal system, I had pretty good networks in both of those worlds, but not really beyond that. So LeadBoston was particularly helpful in connecting me with people in the business world that worked on many different areas outside of the criminal legal system and the nonprofit world. I still remained connected over the past in 2021 through a anti-racism community that LeadBoston started with LeadBoston alums. So it's not just during your time with LeadBoston that you're able to have these informational sessions and learn from your peers. There's also all these alumni events that are offered that are really helpful to me. A couple of the things I took back to my work, the articles that LeadBoston shares were really helpful, particularly at the time I was with a nonprofit that was really ramping up their DEI work, as I think many people were over the past year. And I got to bring all these resources to the table that were shared with me through LeadBoston. And I also brought the backing of LeadBoston when I kind of talked about things at those DEI meetings. So I think in the past, it was kind of, I think, or my thoughts are this. And after engaging in a LeadBoston session, I was able to come to that DEI group at my nonprofit and say, at LeadBoston, I learned this, or my LeadBoston peers are doing this. So I think that was helpful backing for me. It wasn't just my thoughts and ideas, but it was, based on the research, the information shared from LeadBoston, and what other people were doing around the city. So I found that really helpful. I also liked hearing what everybody was doing for, I'll say, for the common good in the nonprofit world. And, curious what Harry has to share about this, but you are kind of, you work with a lot of people from the nonprofit world and not beyond that. And so it was really good to see people from State Street and John Hancock and from Boston Public Schools and from hospitals around the city, and to hear specifically what they were doing to improve the city of Boston beyond kind of the interest of their individual work. So that was really helpful to me and helped facilitate different connections that I didn't really know were possible kind of outside of the nonprofit network. I also really liked that LeadBoston utilized the expertise of its participants. So, for example, when we had presentations on education, they would ask the LeadBoston participants that worked in education to be a part of that day. So it wasn't just outside presenters, but that it was people that worked in the field. So you'll notice on the graph that Rachel had showed, it showed incarceration and reentry. And at the time, I was overseeing reentry programs. And so I presented as part of that LeadBoston Day. So I really appreciated, that YW brought in people from the outside, but also said, if you're in this LeadBoston cohort and you have expertise on the subject matter, we specifically want to hear from you too. And some of my favorite memories, we were lucky that we were able to have our retreat, or as LeadBoston calls it, advance, in person in February of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So it was a two full days of, I'd say, almost kind of team building activities and learning specifically around DEI that were just so helpful to do in person. So I think that was really great, and we valued that because the next month we had to switch to virtual. So I love that there's a hybrid model moving forward. And I also really liked the kind of unofficial opportunities to talk. So at 5 o'clock once a month, it used to be in person. You would go to a restaurant location after the LeadBoston Day, but we switched to using Zoom at 5 o'clock once a month. We would just kind of, whoever would join, would jump on the Zoom, and we'd talk about whatever was going on in the world, in the city, and our lives. And it was just a really good opportunity to discuss current events. And really, a lot of the discussions we had were around mental health and how current events, both pandemic and efforts in against systemic racism, about how those affected our mental health, affected our organizations. And we were able to have, I'd say, unstructured conversations, but with colleagues, with peers. And I really appreciated that space to have that with people outside of our organization, but facing, similar struggles and similar initiatives at the time. So I think that was really helpful for me as well, in addition to the LeadBoston program days.
Let me say I really welcome this opportunity to address those of you thinking about joining or being a part of LeadBoston. You'll probably hear a lot of recurring themes in my words that you heard from Gabriella as well, and I think that should further highlight how amazing this program is, but also that the experience is as rich as as stated. I came to LeadBoston. One of my really good friends outside of LeadBoston is also one of the lead facilitators of the program, Jeff Rogers, who some of you may know will eventually encounter. Again, a good friend of mine, but I had also heard about LeadBoston also and similarly in past professional contexts, people who had been a part of the program or connected to it, and it was always a positive exchange anytime I heard anything about it. And in full disclosure, I have a number of roles and a number of responsibilities, like many of you, I'm sure. And I was a little nervous to join because I felt like my bandwidth was just really limited. And I was, as much as I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity, I was also, just again, skeptical that I could really embrace it and fully, enjoy the experience the way, that you should. And I'm really glad that I was encouraged and actually was able to take advantage of it, because it has absolutely been an asset to not only networking, but also just again my general growth and development as a leader in this city. And so that makes me feel extraordinarily grateful to be a part of it. And so I'll talk a little bit more about again why I'm grateful in a moment, but just to sort of add to the again, what I appreciate about LeadBoston, again, the networking piece can't be understated. I mean, Gabriella started with that, and I'd start with it too. And Rachel alluded to this in the introduction. The level of diversity and the level of just the amount of industry, the amount of the fields that are represented in one cohort is pretty fantastic. Whatever your interest might be, or wherever your curiosity might be in any number of fields, it's probably almost definitely represented in this cohort or in the cohort. And so that in and of itself gives you a again, just access to an extraordinary amount of perspective, which is again has extraordinary value. On top of that, for me, I call it, it's sort of adding to my leadership toolbox, right? So, for those of you who, again, I imagine all of you are in some level of leadership or management or executive role in your respective organizations, you can't have too many tools in the toolbox, right? We're in such a, as we grow, we're becoming in more and more global, more diverse, more complicated workforce environment. And so leadership in these environments and quality leadership is that much more important and that much more valued. And so ways in which we are able to build those muscles and exercise them, LeadBoston gives us an opportunity to do that. And with both the content and again with the amount of networking that's possible. I think beyond or sort of connected to the networking as well is that one of the things that's I find also really valuable about LeadBoston is just being connected to a cohort that's committed to a better Boston, right? Like I grew up in this city. I'm born and bred in Dorchester. Boston is my home and has been, and I imagine will be for some time. And so before LeadBoston, I was committed and invested in Boston and being a better Boston in any ways in which I could do in my personal capacity. So to be connected to a larger cohort of people and of extraordinary professionals who also share that vision, again, there's a sense of belonging there that's really unique. Again, I encourage you to think about that as well, as your reasoning for wanting to be a part of this. And lastly, and it's certainly not to be understated at all, that these are all reasons, they're all connected, is the staff at LeadBoston. I mentioned earlier, again, I was nervous about my bandwidth, and Rachel, here's the leader of the program, essentially, one of the key leaders. She called me directly and said, Harry, let's just have a conversation. Let what ways in which I can help you. And Rachel, you probably remember this. We had like a 30-minute conversation where she said, hey, I get it. We're all stretched, but, let's talk it through. How can we help you be a part of this program? And that alone, that level of individual sort of attention and just commitment to, again, I could have said, no, I'm all set, or I could have said, sure, or there's 100 others waiting behind me and applicants that she could have, pulled in. But the fact that she sort of took that time was that was sort of maybe even the tip of the cap, or the tip over that said, hey, this is a special group of people. And again, I already mentioned my good friend Jeff, so I'm not going to mention him anymore. He gets enough praise. But even Joanna too has been extraordinary. Again, for someone to be in the background, her role is so, just again, can't be understated how much she keeps the trains moving and keeps things going. And the conversations I've had with her throughout my course in this program has been also just super helpful. So I'll stop there because I probably could go on and on, but again, it has been, in this very relatively short time, 6 months, about halfway through the program, I'm feeling unbelievably connected and extraordinarily grateful to be, part of this cohort, and then I'm part of a larger cohort of alum like Gabriella.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Samuel to talk to you all a little bit more about the benefits of the Alumni Network.
A big part of the benefit of the LeadBoston program is not only having a network that is just exponentially expanded, but the actual tangible interpersonal connections that you gain through this program. So upon joining the program, you'll join 1,000 plus inclusive leaders who have already gone through it and create those lasting connections to bring back learnings and positive impact for your workplace. So we know that folks really stay connected, and as a few people have mentioned, you've heard people talk about their experience in the program, you've heard about those deep connections. And we know that even as far back as 2001 class, they had a reunion this past year. So know that this isn't just a program that is solely condensed into that 11-month period, that you'll be able to connect with these folks in a lifelong way. And that's really amazing, Robin, about the folks you are mentioning in New Jersey who are so connected. So those connections aren't just informal. We definitely have ways to engage our alumni community with events and LinkedIn group, volunteer opportunities, ways to continue staying engaged with the ethos of the program, trying to think about inequity, inclusion, and there's an anti-racist leadership group. YW has a fair amount of events throughout the year that you'll be able to engage with us as a staff, and also the alumni and supporters of YW more broadly as well. And then I think last, just emphasizing again that this work of thinking about inclusion and equity is really, really hard. And knowing that you won't be doing that alone during the program, but that you'll have folks who are going to continue supporting you, trying to make those shifts and changes in your workplace and community afterwards.
Sometimes we get the question of, I'm sold. Hopefully by now, all of you are sold. You see the value of the program and you want to do it. But a few of you might be thinking, how do I get my employer on board? How do I get my employer to sponsor me and fund me to do this program? And we have a few thoughts and answers to that. So Harry sort of mentioned that there are benefits to the program for you as an individual, but also for your organization, because the idea is that you'll bring back the things that you've learned. So for you, you're getting a deepened commitment to equity. You're building your toolbox, as Harry talked about a lot. You're getting this strong network of support and network of peers. But for your workplace is also sponsoring you to be equipped with some skills that can advance inclusion and equity in the workplace. It will strengthen your ability to solve challenging problems, make better decisions at work, solve conflict, and it will broaden your access and your org's access to key leaders and institutions and contacts across Boston. So really twofold benefits. And we also like to share some information on why it matters that can also be compelling to share with your employers. So we know that our nation is changing. By 2050, there will be no racial or ethnic majority in the US. And when we think about the workplace specifically, millennials of color are 3 times more likely to quit their jobs than their white counterparts. This turnover alone is costing over $30 billion a year. And why are people leaving? Unfair treatment is cited as a turnover factor almost 2 times as often as a better job offer. And we're seeing this throughout the pandemic even more frequently. This data, I think, was it was from 2019 or 2020, but pre-pandemic. And right now we're seeing even more of changes in the workforce. We know that 67%, the majority of the workforce, cites workplace diversity as important to them. And for women, are leaving their jobs at similar rates as men, but there are 81% of women who plan to leave their company but stay in the workforce. So equity issues are really playing a factor in the success of companies. And we're also seeing that here with some business case stats. So with inclusive talent practices, they are 30% higher revenue per employee at organizations that have inclusive practices. In the top quartile for gender diversity, are companies that are in the top quartile are 21% more likely to outperform companies in the bottom quartile. And companies in the top quartile for racial diversity are 33% more likely to outperform their peers. So if your organization is interested in like return on investment and numbers and data, the data tells the story that the skills of diversity, equity, and inclusion are critical to a successful workplace. We thank you so much for coming. We hope that you'll consider LeadBoston. If you do come up with any more questions or you feel like you could use some support with having the conversations with your employer, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, to Samuel, or to Joanna. We are always happy to help you think through LeadBoston, whether this is the right program for you, and how to have those conversations.